Your butt. Do you hear the people singing the song of Angry Pooch? Oh, don't forget to set it down. Done. Update. There we go. Can you see me? Just that. Hey there. Hello, hello. Hello there. So, I am streaming. See? Stuff was on the screen. I think. Maybe. Hello? Come on. Where am I? I hate it when one screen says I'm here and another one doesn't. Hello? Maybe. I see myself on my USB. Why am I not showing up on stream? Hello? Hello, hello, hello. Yep. Yep. Okay, now I'm showing. That's cool. I see myself on my USB. Yep. Okay, now I'm showing. That's cool. I mean, I'm watching my own stream, so I'll pretty soon I'll be lurking on myself. I'm just that talented, I guess. I don't know. I have to do something about the feedback loop, though. That's kind of a pain in the ass. Okay, just keep that as is. Okay. Do 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 do. Okay, so like I was saying, I'm kind of watching Sly right now, but since I am the media major that I am, I did an old TV trick and I kind of pre-recorded myself. So yeah, enjoy the fairy tales. If you need me, I'll be around somewhere. Let's see. Oh, look at me. I'm so
Hello, Cubs. That's all right there. Not sure how I'm going to be feeling tonight, so I'm kind of doing a preemptive thing here. So I am going to pre-record. One of those things that TV people do occasionally. So yeah, there's always that. What it is I'm going to go ahead and read the Irish fairy tales, but I'm going to do it during the day, and I'll just do the video playback tonight. But will you notice? Of course you will, because I will, of course. I'll do this just for the hell of it. Not that anyone will see it, except it's on screen for chat, so. Ta-da! See that message? That would say that I'm recording. I am recording. I'm recording right now. I'm not streaming, but I am recording. I'm going to have to go back and make sure that my audio is picked up, but it does say that I do have it on. I will be lurking in chat most likely if I'm doing the pre-records. So when I do stream this on its regular scheduled time, it will be a video playback of me doing it because, well, might as well make use of my TV degree somehow, right? This is pretty much just pre-recording a show, so nothing major there, right? We cool with that? I don't hear any answers. I don't hear any answers because no one's here. I'm recording. Ha 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 ha. Okay, so our shows. I'll probably have to crop this later, so it's just a fairy tale by itself when I do a playlist on it. But anyway, tonight we're going to be reading The Puka. Author is only listed as EW. So this would be The Puka. Let me try that again. Let me do this real quick. Beep. Beep. Okay. The Puka by EW. Now that the schoolmaster is abroad, there can be no question that the warm sun of education will, in the course of a very few years, dissipate those vapors of superstition, whose wild and shadowy forms have, from time immemorial, thrown a mysterious mantle around our mountain summits, shed a darker horror through our deepest glens, and traced some legendary tale on each unchiseled column of stone that rises on our bleakest hills, and peopled the green border with the wizard stream and sainted well with beings of a supernatural world. While, however, the Friends of Ireland could not be pleased in thinking that our peasantry school, from being better informed, who renounce their belief in these idle tales of superstition, to which they, unfortunately, have centuries taught to listen with delight, to the exclusion of matters more rational and more important. It is to be hoped that the two prominent features of our antiquity as a nation will not be altogether sought, lost of, namely, our vernacular language, and those extraordinary legends which are stemmed by many as going a great length to prove, from their remarkable analogy with all the tales of the Eastern world, our Oriental descent. Although the good people still remain the most respectable footing, a peasant may now travel from Cape Clear to Connemara without encountering once dreaded personage, a ghost. Even the puka, or Irish goblin, has not for the last 40 years, as far as a recollection serves, been known to shake the dripping ooze from its hairy hide, to approach the haunts of men, or to practice by the conscience of the moon, like the fairies or the satyrs of heathen mythology, any of those unlikely tricks upon his mortal neighbors for which he was once period so much dreaded in many portions of our island. The puka is described as a frisky, mischievous being, having such a turn for roguish fun as to introduce him to be all night and wait for the Cara returning over the moor from the pleasures of the card table, or for the frequenters of wakes. His usual appearance was that of a sturdy pony with a shaggy hide. He generally lay crouched like a cat in the pathway of an unfortunate pedestrian. Then, starting between his legs, he hoisted the unlucky wretch aloft on his crupper, from which notion breaking rushing by stone walls. No furious driving through white-thorn hedges, or life-shaking plunges down the cliffs or quagmire could unseat him. The first crowing of the March cock respited the sorrowful rider, who generally ended his dear bought tour with a tremendous fling from the puka's back into some deep bog-hole or thorny brake, where 10,000 prickles reared their heads to drink the blood of his bruised and broken flesh. On the other hand, he is reported to be commiserate the lot of the Banat traveler, and there are some instances on record of his having gently trotted beneath the wayfaring cottager for many a mile to the neighborhood of a well-remembered cabin on the heath. Feapuka, in the country of Kerry, was, as its name imports, the haunt of one of the imaginary monsters. This Fea, or marsh, belonged to the Timdorni, a snug farmer, whose ancestors for many years occupied the adjacent farm, and who honest men, in that golden age, never found it necessary to disturb the goblin in their favorite haunt, by reclaiming his dreary abode. But when the farm which his grandfather tilled came to Tim Dorney's occupation, a taste for improvement and the necessary expenditure of a large and increasing family introduced him to cross-cut the Feapuka by drains and ditches, and 2 summers had hardly passed when this haunt of the wild goose and the dark mischievous goblin afforded a heavy sward of hay, and firm footing for man and beast. The puka, thus beaten up and driven from the marsh, naturally turned his thoughts to the meditation on revenge on him who, with profane hand, rent asunder that sacred veil which the superstition of ages had woven around its dreaded spot. Tim was a painstaking, industrious peasant, and accustomed to traverse his farm every night to ascertain that no neighboring cattle trespassed on his ground. One night, as he returned along the border of his march, he saw something shaped like a dark-colored, long-tailed pony lying in the narrow way directly across his path, and before he could slip aside to shun the lurking apparition, the puka, for it was he, suddenly started between the legs of the terrified farmer and bore him off the ground. The goblin rushed along the speed with the whirlwind, and Tim's first moment of reflection was employed by fruitless attempts to fling himself to the ground. But he found that some invisible hand had bound him to the back of the supernatural enemy. It would be tedious to recount the hard rubbings against stone walls and the wild rushings through the quickset hedges that Tim Dorney endured, while the rapidity of his flight completely deprived him of breath and utterance. At last they rushed toward a tall cliff, which frowned in horrid gloom above the deep river, and intercepted by its giant bulk, the yellow light of the moon that lit the mountain tops, quivered on the rushing foliage of the leaves, and brightened in its advance, burnished the trembling waters with liquid fire. The puka pushed with unabated speed to the edge of the rock, then suddenly stopped, as if to death-pang his agonized victim by a previous view of the fearful height and dark waves that curled among the pointed rocks below. Tim Dorney now concluded that all his life would be ended for him in the next plunge, yelled a shriek of unmutable dismay. The tall cliff returned the piercing sound, which, with the scream of the startled wildfowl and the demon voice of the puka, that combined with a mockery of human laughter with the wild, undescribable howl, blended in horror until, along with the lonely glen. Whether the puka was satisfied with thus inflicting the pangs of the fright and death by anticipation, or that he possessed no power over human life, did not appear. But in the next moment he started from the fearful cliff and returned through the deep ravines and tangled underwood to a bird's brake that skirted the border of the standing pool. Plunged his unfortunate rider among the sharp bushes. Happy in his deliverance, he heard the troubled waters of the dark pool resound with the plunge of the returning puka, held his uncouth figure, glanced darkly along the moor, till the glistening form drew grimly faint in the moonlight, and the hurtled splashing of his rapid hoof broke the silence of the night no more. Tim, as may be naturally supposed, made the best of his way to the cottage, and being of true Malison origin, determined on having his revenge upon his fiendish enemy. It was a fine night in the month of August, when Tim Dorney, having sufficiently recruited himself after his adventure of wild horsemanship, walked forth like him that hath his quarrel just, doubly armed. His spurs were furnished with a pair of long-necked spurs. His heels were furnished with long-necked spurs that bore rowels contrived at the next forge, which could goad the rhinoceros to death. His hand wielded a loading whip, so called that the handle, being set with lead, and in the grasp of a strong man, was capable of felling an ox. He whistled as he went, not for want of thought, for his mind was brooding over a plan to revenge against the puka, who, according to his usual habit, started between farmers' legs and bore them off. Tim, nothing loath of the abduction, just when the puka was commencing his antics, twisted the lash of the whip around his hand, and leveled such a blow against the goblin's ears that would have crushed any skull made of mortal, penetrable stuff, while the sharp-rolled spears gave ample revenge to the pointed insults of the preceding nights. Dire were the tossings, deep the groans of the puka during his unmerciful ride. But Tim Dorney clung to him like a monkey until the puka lay down, outmastered by his mortal antagonist. Next night, Tim walked abroad the quest of his acquaintance. He whistled his favorite air, Thamahula, to lull the suspicions of the latter, who held aloof, quite on his guard, eyeing the other from his lurking place, and breaking his usual taciturnity by asking, in an uncouth voice, the well-remembered question, Nagraneworth, have you the sharp things on? Some years had rolled their seasons around, and the Pooka seemed to have entirely forgotten his antagonist and his ancient dwelling of the marsh when Tim Dorney had occasionally to visit a gossip's sister's cousin's brother-in-law, who had likely come after an absence of 25 years on board a man-of-war. The credit side of the account sheet of the seaman's life was fraught with a copious list of wonders. All his travel was history, and a pension of 9 pence a day. On the debtor side stood the loss of the right arm, the closing of his starboard eye, and sundry minor details received in the duty of boarding and the cutting out and occasional tavern scuffles. Tim was highly delighted as the tough yarn of his old acquaintance heard with gaping wonderment of the recital of battle with a French 74 off the island of Elba, where the relator lost his precious arm. An encounter with a Sallee rover, which they sent down to Old Davy, and a dreadful storm near the island of Malta. Of voyages along the coast of Tunis, where the people all were musicianers, by Tripoli, the famous for its wrestlers, and a journey through the desert of Barca, where the inhabitants, men and women, have dogs' heads. Oh, Barca. Okay, I've looked it up. The ale of the neighboring shebeen greatly improved the sailor's turn for narration, and as though the rain poured in torrents through the grass-grown roof of the cabin, yet you flew on with songs and clatter, and ale was growing better. Yeah, okay. But Tim, being retained the night of Form 1 of a party that had engaged to play at cards for 200 of herrings, and he was famous Caro, he could not disappoint friends who mainly depended on Tim's address to carry off the wager. The rain had now ceased, and after grasping the sailor's hand and requesting his company of the given night of Pooka, he departed. The moon, yet obscured by heavy clouds, cast a sad and sickly gleam upon the path, which, winding down a precipitous descent, led into the bosom of the deep glen, where the turbid mountain torrents had swelled into muddy waves, the clear and beautiful brook that erewhile had bubbled with soothing murmurs along with the yellow pebbles. There was no sound on the hill, save for the plaintive howl of a watchdog baying at the broad round moon. The night wind slightly shook the thin foliage of the decaying wood that surmounted the steep sides of the glen, and the hoarse, hollow sound of the roaring river, that would seem to be fanciful ere the brooding voice of the water fairy echoing in the distant banks. Though Tim Dorney's education had taught him to people the loneliest scenes of beings of another life, yet he passed unappalled to the brink of the torrent, and sighed to behold the force of the stream left him little chance of crossing over with safety. While he loitered along the bank, he was agreeably surprised to behold a little cove, which led into a ford, a small horse, resembling a carry pony. He was tied by the halter, and had a pillion sosa, or straw saddle, on his back, and into one of the foldings of the straw saddle was stuck a whitethorn plant. Tim, grateful for this favoring opportunity of moving homeward, had already raised his leg to mount when the titter of suppressed laughter behind a crag shook his heart with terror, and excited for a suspicion of the pony. He had not meddled with the whitethorn stick, for he rarely went abroad day and night unprovided with choice hazel sapling. This miraculous plant, against which nothing evil can contend, well served his time and need, for retiring a little, Tim Dorney bestowed a hearty salute on the Gawal Pooka, for it was he that the laughter sounded was changed into a wild howl, and the Pooka disappeared along the troubled stream. The dashing waters deluged the surrounding banks. But a time arrived when the persevering goblin wreaked cruel revenge on his hitherto fortunate adversary. It was approaching the 25th of March, when the farmers usually pay their rent, and Tim, who was extremely punctual in the payment of the half-year's gale, prepared to send a quantity of those last season's butter to Cork for that purpose. Wheel carriages were then totally unknown for that part of the country. The sliding car, indebted to no wheels, guided in the vicinity of the farms, while the burdens were conveyed to more remote places on the back of horses. 5 or 6 neighbors at this time were setting off to transmit the produce of the dairy to Cork, and Tim, with 4 stunted nags that usually ran wild and free on the mountains, fell into their company. Each little horse was generally laden with 2 full bounds of butter, but 1 or 2, whose owners were unable to furnish even the number of furskins, carried a large stone placed on the opposite side to balance the single one. After journeying all night, on the next morning an accident happened to Tim Dorney on his way through Mill Street that seemed the type and forerunner of the evening's misfortune. As the carriage dragoons marched in a long procession along the single street that composes the little town, the drummer of the company, stationed in the barrack, beat the doubling drum with such ferocious heat as to set the ponies prancing beneath their riders and buttered furskins. It happened that the nag on which Tim rode, by an unfortunate circumvent on the slippery pavement, had his heels tripped up and fell under the load that lumbered on its back. The rider, whose Melosian Arecidabe was not much allied by having the accident perpetrated on a red coat, drew his trusty hazel from its resting place between the firkins, and by its instantaneous application to the drummer's head, forced him to bite the dust. Wow. Though the drummer, for certain striking reasons, was no favorite with his comrades, yet a sentinel who witnessed the insult to the cloth leveled Tim with the butt end of his piece. The alarm was given, the soldiers rushed thick and fast to assault the carriage dragoons, and as quick rushed the townfolk to their support. The reader's imagination must supply what I failed in deliberating. It will suffice to tell that after some broken heads and bayonet thrusts on both sides, the redcoats retreated to their stronghold, and the triumphant carrions were escorted by their faithful allies to the summit of Mushroom Mountain. By the evening, the caravan came within view of Blarney Castle. All the last rays of the declining sun tinged the arid turrets with golden hue. As the night breeze blew current and fierce, our travelers halted at a small public house on the road, to repel its chilling influence by the glass of spirits. While delay was hardly for a minute, as they hastened to overtake the horses that moved at a slow pace before them, but suddenly some strange disorder began to prevail among the animals. Some fled terrified along the road, others ran across the open common that extended to the right. And Tim Dorvan's train, particularly, were observed to reach a fearful and perpendicular descent, from whose edge of the road lay about 20 yards. Their terrified owner uttered a shriek of dread and despair when he beheld the misshapen, hairy Puka urge his cattle to the steep cliff. It was only a work of a moment, but rushed as if by an irresistible impulse to a fatal brink, and tumbling headlong, one instant beheld their shattered, lifeless carcasses strew the bottom of the stream-worn ravine. The pointed rocks below staved the butter casks to pieces, and their contents were wholly lost. This was but the commencement of the train of misfortune for Tim Dooley. He was finally ejected from his snug, well-improved farm, where Puka had been the occupation of his family for 150 years before, passed into the hands of strangers, and the descendants of Tim Dorney are homeless wanderers of the earth, and now such accounts which this day given by the remaining members of the family of the commencement of their misfortunes. I really apologize for how badly I was reading that. Let me do something real quick. Okay. I'm giving myself visual cues. Okay, Barca. Oh, no, where Barca is. I can probably have a kid there, apparently. Barca. Desert of Barca? Okay, let's look that up. Let's see. 24 minutes of recording. Where's the Desert of Barca? Where is the Desert of Barca? Where is it? Where is Barca? Oh, it's in Africa, apparently. Algeria. All right. That's kind of cool now. Western Desert of Egypt. That is Barca. Nice. Okay. Anyway, Cubs. As I said, it was just going to be a quick recording and everything else, so. Yeah. Where am I? Why does my image always vanish? Hello? Oh, there we go. Anyway, I feel bad it's only half an hour. I don't know if I want to try to read another story or not. Let's see. Bunsworth Banshee is 7 pages. Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. Okay. Let's do another story. Okay. And doop. The Bunsworth Banshee by T. Crofton Croaker. The Reverend Charles Bunsworth was rector of Bunsworth in the county of Cork about the middle of the last century. He was a man of unaffected piety and of sound learning, pure in heart and benevolent in intention. By the rich he was respected, by the poor beloved, nor did a difference of creed prevent their looking up to the minister. So was Mr. Bunsworth called to them. in matters of difficulty and in seasons of distress, confident of receiving from him the advice and assistance that a father would afford his children. He was the friend and the benefactor of the surrounding country. To him, from the neighboring town of Newmarket, came both Current and Yulverton for advice and instructions, previous to their entrance of Dublin College. Young, indigent, and inexperienced, these afterwards eminent men received from him, in addition to the advice they sought, pecuniary aid, and the brilliant career which was theirs, justified the discrimination of the giver. But what extended the fame of Mr. Bunsworth, for beyond the limits of the parishes adjacent to his own, was the performance on the Irish harp, and his hospitable reception and entertainments for the poor harpers who travelled from house to house about the country. Grateful to their patron, these itinerant minstrels sang his praises to the tingling accompaniment of their harps, invoking in return for his bounty abundant blessings on his white head, and celebrating in their rude verses the blooming charms of his daughters, Elizabeth and Mary. It was all these poor fellows could do, but who could doubt their gratitude was sincere, when, at the time of Mr. Bunsworth's death, no less than 15 harps were deposited in the loft of his granary, bequeathed to him by the last members of a race which was now ceased to exist. Trifling, no doubt, an intrinsic value of these relics, yet there was something in gifts of the heart that merits preservation. And it is to be regretted that, when he died, these harps were broken up one after the other and used as firewood by an ignorant follower of the family, who, on the removal of the cork from a temporary change of scene, was left in charge of the house. The circumstances attending the death of Mr. Bunsworth may be doubted by some, but there are still credible witnesses who declare their authenticity and who can be produced to attest most, if not all, of the following particulars. About a week previous to his dissolution, and early in the evening, a noise was heard in the hall door resembling the shearing of a sheep. But at the time no particular attention was paid to it. It was nearly 11 o'clock the same night when Kavanagh, the herdsman, returned from Mallow, whither he had been sent in the afternoon for some medicine, and was observed by Miss Bunsworth, to whom he delivered the parcel, to be much agitated. At this time, it must be observed, her father was by no means considered in danger. "What is the matter, Kavanagh?" asked Miss Bunsworth. But a poor fellow, with a bewildered look, only uttered, "The master, miss, the master, he's going from us." And, overcome with real grief, he burst into a flood of tears. Miss Bunsworth, who was a woman of strong nerve, inquired if anything he had learned from Mull induced him to suspect that her father was worse. "No, miss," said Kavanagh. It was not in Mallow. "Kavanagh," said Miss Bunsworth, with that stateliness of manner for which she is said to have been remarkable, "I fear you have been drinking, which I must say I did not expect at such a time at your present, when it is your duty to have kept yourself sober. I thought you might have been trusted. What should we have done if you had broken a medicine bottle, or lost it? For the doctor said it was the greatest consequence that your master should take it tonight. But I shall speak to you in the morning, when you are in a fitter state to understand what I say." Kavanagh looked up with a stupidity of aspect which did not serve to remove the impression of him being drunk, as his eyes appeared heavy and dull after the flood of tears, but his voice was not that of the intoxicated person. "Miss," he said, "as I hope to receive mercy hereafter, neither bit nor sup has passed my lips since I left this house. But the master—" "Speak softly," said Miss Bunsworth. "He sleeps and is going on as well as we could expect." "Praise be to God for that, anyway," replied Kavanagh. "But, miss, oh, he is going from us surely. We will lose him. The master. We will lose him, and we will lose him." And he wrung his hands together. "What is it you mean, Kavanagh?" asked Miss Bunsworth. Is it mean? Said Kavanagh. The Banshee has come for him, miss, and 'tis not I alone who have heard her. 'Tis an idle superstition, said Miss Bunsworth. Maybe so, said Kavanagh. But if the words idle superstition only sounded upon his ears without reaching his head. Maybe so, he continued. But as I came through the glen of Ballybeg, she was along with me, keening and screeching and clapping her hands by my side every step of the way, with her long white hair falling about her shoulders. I could hear her repeat the master's name every now and then, as plain as I ever hear it. When I came to the old abbey, she parted from me there, and turned into the pigeon field next to the barren ground, and folded her cloak about her. Down she sat under the tree that was struck by the lightning, and began keening and so bitterly that I went through one's heart to hear it. Kavanagh, said Miss Bunsworth, who had, however, listened attentively to the remarkable relation, my father is, I believe, better, and I hope will himself soon be up, and convince you that all is but your own fancy. Nevertheless, I charge you not to mention what you have told me, for there's no occasion to frighten your fellow servants with the story. Mr. Bunsworth gradually declined, but nothing particular occurred until the night previous to his death. That night both his daughters, exhausted from their continued attendance and watching, were prevailed upon to seek some repose, and an elderly lady, a near relative and friend of the family, remained by the bedside of the father. The old gentleman then lay in the parlor, where he had been in the morning removed from his own request, fancying the change would afford him the great relief, and head to his bed were placed close to the window. In the room adjoining sat some male friends, and the usual on the occasions of illness. In the kitchen, as many of the followers of his family had assembled. The night was serene, and moonlight. The sick man slept, and nothing broke the stillness of their melancholy watch. When the little party in the room adjoining the parlor, the door of which stood open, was suddenly roused by the sound at the window near the bed. A rose tree grew outside the window, so close as to touch the glass. This was forced aside by some noise, and low moaning was heard, accompanied by the clapping of hands, as if a female in deep affliction. It seemed as if the sound proceeded from a person holding their mouth close to a window. The lady who sat by the bedside of Mr. Bunsworth went into the adjoining room, and in a tone of alarm inquired of the gentlemen there if they had heard the Banshee. Skeptical of supernatural appearances, two of them rose hastily and went to discover the cause of these sounds, which they had also heard distinctly. They walked all round the house, examining every spot from ground, particularly near the windows from whence the voice had proceeded. The bed of earth beneath, in which the rose tree was planted, had been recently dug, the print of a footstep. If the tree had been forced aside by a mortal hand, there would have inevitably been remaining. But they could perceive no such impression, and an unbroken stillness reigned without. Hoping to dispel the mystery, they continued their search anxiously along the road, from the straightness of which, on the lightness of the night, they were enabled to see some distance around them, but all was silent and deserted. They returned, surprised and disappointed. How much more, then, were they astonished at learning that the whole time of their absence those who remained within the house had heard the moaning and clapping of hands even louder and more distinct than before they had gone out. No sooner was the door to the room closed to them than they again heard the same mournful sounds. Every excuse and gloom. That only got me up to 38 minutes. This is the next one. The next story in here is roughly 11 pages. That's the fate of Frank Mckenna. Okay, let me go and read this one too.
Now, can you hear me? Okay. Anyway, just checking up on you. I'm still watching Sly and Draft playing, so yeah. Hope you're enjoying the story. I will check back up on you in a bit. Yeah, cool. I think we're a little over halfway through. Well, I think there was one story left, so let's see. Oh, still another 20 minutes left of the video. So, yeah, keep chilling and hanging out. I'll check back on you in a bit. All right? Cool.
The Fate of Frank Mckenna by William Carlton. There lived a man named Mckenna at the hip of one of the mountainous hills which divide the country of Tyrone from that of Monaghan. This Mckenna had two sons, one of whom was in the habit of tracing hares on Sunday, whenever there happened to be a fall in the snow. His father, it seems, had frequently remonstrated with him upon what he considered to be a violation of the Lord's Day, as well as the general neglect of Mass. The young man, however, thought otherwise, harmless and inoffensive, and was the matter quite insensible to paternal reproof, and continued to trace wherever the avocations of labor would allow him. It so happened upon that Christmas morning, I think the year 1814, there was a deep fall of snow, and young Mckenna, instead of going to Mass, got down on his cockstick, which is a staff much thicker and heavier on one end than at the other. Thanks for clarification. And prepared to set out after his favorite amusements. His father, seeing this, reproved him again seriously, and insisted that he should attend prayers. His enthusiasm of the sport, however, was stronger than his love of religion, and he refused to be guided by his father's advice. The old man decided an altercation got warm, and finding that the son obstinately scorned his authority, he knelt down and prayed that if the boy persisted in following his own will, that he might never return from the mountain unless he is a corpse. Damn. The imprecation, which was certainly as harsh as it was.
Hey, Cubs, just interrupting again. Cockstick. Uh, pretty much it's kind of a spear slash hiking stick. It does. I do give a description of it. At least the book does, where it is. Hold on. Why am I not moving? Hello. No, there we go. Anyway, it's kind of like a quarterstaff, except it's narrower on one end. It can be used as a spear, it could be used as a bludgeoning instrument, that kind of thing. Uh, just thought I'd pop in and give that knowledge. Kind of like later on in this recording, it talks about how I was talking about how well. Yeah, I'm kind of random right now. Yeah, talking about the dog-headed men. It's kind of strange because biblical reference. There was a dog-headed man. It was Saint Christopher, and he was actually a saint in Ireland. So that's kind of cool that we have a dog-headed man in Ireland. But one of the stories on here actually mentions that the dog-headed men were from Barca, the desert of Barca. I did look it up. The desert of Barca is west of Egypt. So, yeah, Anubis rocks. Anyway, I should probably let you get back to the video. Hold on. I'll get started again.
Was impious and senseless, might have startled many a mind from purpose that was, to say the least of it, at variance with a religion and the respect due to a father. It had no effect, however, upon the son, who is said to have replied that whether he ever returned or not, he was determined on going, and go accordingly he did. He was not, however, alone, for it appears that 3 or 4 of the neighboring young men accompanied him. Whether their sport was good or otherwise is not the purpose, neither am I able to say, but the story goes that towards the latter part of the day they started a larger and darker hare than any had seen before, and that she kept dodging them before being bit by bits, leading him to suppose that every succeeding cast of the cockstick would bring her down. It was afterwards observed that she also led them into the recesses of mountains, and although they tried to return her course homewards, they could not succeed in doing so. As evening advanced, the companions of Mckenna began to feel the fall of pursuing her further, and to perceive the danger of losing their way in the mountains should night or snowstorm come upon them. They therefore proposed to give over the chase and return home. But Mckenna would not hear it. "If you wish to go home, you may," he said. "As for me, I'll never leave the hills till I have her with me." They begged and entreated of him to desist and return, but all to no purpose. They appeared to be what the Scotch called fey, that is, so to act as if they removed some impulse that leads to death, and from some influence of which man cannot withdraw himself. At length, on finding him inconceivably obstinate, they left him pursuing the hare directly into the heart of the mountains and returned to their respective homes. In the meantime, one of the most terrible snowstorms ever remembered in that part of the country came on, and the consequence was that the self-willed young man, who had equally trampled his sanctions of religion and parental authority, was given over for lost. Soon as the tempest became still, the neighbors assembled in a body and proceeded to look for him. The snow, however, had fallen so heavily that not a single mark of a footstep could be seen. Nothing but one wide waste of white undulating hills met the eye wherever it turned, and of Mckenna no trace whatsoever was visible or could be found. His father, now remembering the unnatural character of his imprecation, was clearly distracted, for although the body had not been found, still by anyone who had witnessed the sudden rage of the storm, and he knew the mountains' escape or survival was felt to be impossible. Every day for about a week the large parties were out among the hill ranges seeking him, but to no purpose. At length there came a thaw, and his body was found in the snow wreaths, lying in the supine posture with the circle of which he had drawn around him with his cockstick. His prayer book lay open on his mouth, and his hat was pulled down so as to cover his face.
Cockstick.
It was unnecessary to say that the rumor of his death, or the circumstances under which he left home, created a most extraordinary sensation over the county, a sensation that was greater in proportion to the uncertainty occasioned by his not having been found either dead or alive. Some affirmed that he had crossed the mountains and was seen in Monaghan, Others that he had been seen in clones in Emmerdale or 5 Mile Town. But despite all these agreeable reports, the melancholy truth was at length made clear by the appearance of the body that had just been stated. Now, it has happened that the house nearest the spot where he lay is inhabited by a man named Daly. I think, but of name I am not certain, who was a herd or a caretaker to Dr. Porter, then Bishop of Clore. The situation of this house was the most lonely and desolate looking that could be imagined. It was at least 2 miles distant from any human habitation, being surrounded by one side of the dreary waste of the dark moor. By this house lay a route of those who had found the corpse, and I believe the door of it was borrowed for the purpose of conveying it home. Be this as it may, the family witnessed the melancholy procession as it passed through the mountains, and when in the place of the circumstances are all considered, we may admit to the ignorance and superstitious people, whose minds even upon ordinary occasions were strongly affected by such manners, it was a sight calculated to leave behind a deep and terrible impression. Time soon proved that it did so. An accident is said to have occurred at the funeral, which might be alluded to the midnight mass, and which is certainly fine keeping with the wild spirit of the whole melancholy event. When the procession had advanced to the place called Mckenna, a large dark-colored hare, which was instantly recognized by those who had been with him on the hills as the identical one that led them to his fate. It is said to have crossed the road about 20 yards or so before the coffin. The story goes that a man stuck it on its side with a stone, and that the blow, which would have killed an ordinary hare, not only did no injury, but occasionally sounded to proceed from the body, resembling a hollow one emitting from the empty barrel that struck. In the meantime, the interment took place, and the sensation began, like every other, to die away in the natural progress of time, when, behold, a report ran across that wildfire-like, to use the language of the people, Frank Mckenna was appearing. Seldom indeed was the rumor of an apparition composed of materials so strongly calculated to win popular assent, or to baffle regional investigation. As every man is not a Hibbert nor a Nicolai, so will many, until such circumstances are made properly intelligible, continue to yield credence to the testimony which was not convince the judgment on any other subject. The case in question furnished as fine a specimen of a true ghost story, freed from any superstition of imposture or design, as could be submitted but to a philosopher, and yet, notwithstanding the array of apparent attacks connected with it, nothing in the world is simpler or easier solution. One night, about a fortnight after his funeral, the daughter of Daly, the herd, a girl about 14, while lying in the bed, saw what appeared to be the likeness of Mckenna, who had been lost. She screamed out, and covering her head with the bedclothes, told her father and mother that Frank Mckenna was in the house. An alarming intelligence naturally produced great terror. Still, Daly, who, notwithstanding in belief of such matters, possessed a great deal of moral courage, and was cool enough to rise and examine the house, which consisted of only one apartment. This gave the daughter some courage, who, on finding that her father could not see him, ventured to look herself, and since she could see nothing of him herself, she soon fell asleep. Her father attributed what she saw to fear, and some accidental combination of shadows proceeding from the furniture, for it was a clear moonlit night. The light of the following day dispelled a great deal of the apprehension, and comparatively little thought of it till evening again advanced, when the fears of the daughter began to return. They appeared to be prophetic, for she said when night came that she knew he would appear again, and according to the same hour, he did so. This was repeated for several successive nights until the girl, from very hearty of terror, began to become so familiar with the spectre as to venture to address it. "In the name of God," she asked, "what is troubling you, or why do you appear to me of your own instead of your own family relations?" The ghost's answer alone might settle the question involved, with the authenticity of its appearance being, as it was, the account of one of the most ludicrous missions ever a spirit was dispatched upon. "I am not allowed," he said, "to speak with any of my friends, for I parted with them in anger. But I'm come to tell you that they're quarreling about my breeches. A new pair that I got made for Christmas Day, and as I was coming up to trace the mountains, I thought the old ones could do better, and, of course, didn't put the new pair on me, by reason of appearing," he added, "is that you may tell my friends that none of them is to wear them, for they must be given to charity." The serious and solemn intimation from which the ghost was duly communicated to the family, and it was found to be the circumstances were exactly as it had presented them. This, of course, was considered as sufficient proof of truth of any mission. Their conversations now became not only frequent, but became friendly and familiar. The girl became a favorite of the spectre, and the spectre, on the other hand, soon lost all its terrors in her eyes. He told her that with his friends were bearing home his body, the handspikes or poles in which they carried him cut his back, and occasionally and occasioned him with great pain. The cutting of the back also was known to be true, and strengthened the course and truth of the authenticity of their dialogues. The whole neighborhood was now in a commotion with this story and the apparition, and the persons inside it began curiosity to visit the girl in order to satisfy themselves of the truth that they had been hearing. Everything, however, was not corroborated, and the child herself, without any symptoms of anxiety or terror, artlessly related her conversation with the spirit. Hitherto their interviews had been nocturnal, but now the ghost found its footing made good. He put on a hearty face and ventured to appear by daylight. The girl also fell into states of syncope, and while her fits lasted, the long conversations with him upon the subject of God, the Blessed Virgin, and heaven took place between them. He was certainly an excellent moralist, and gave her the best advice. Swearing, drunkenness, theft, and every evil propensity of our nature were declaimed against the decree of the spectral eloquence, quite surprising. Common fame had now a topic dear to our hearts. Never was a ghost made more by his best friends than she made of him. The whole country was in a tumult, and I remember well the crowds that flocked to the lonely little cabin in the mountains, now the scene of matters so interesting and important. Not a single day passed in which I should think from 10 to 20, 30, or 50% persons were not present at these singular interviews. Nothing else was talked of, or thought of, and, as I can well testify, dreamt of. I would myself have gone to Daly's, were it not for the confounded misgiving I had, and perhaps the ghost might take such a fancy as to appearing to me, as he had taken to cultivate an intimacy with the girl. It so happens that when I see the face of an individual nailed down in the coffin, chilling and gloomy operation, I experience no particular wish to look upon it again. Many persons might imagine that the herd's daughter was acting as part of an impostor, but first originating and then continuing by such diversion, if one, however, as an impostor, it was the ghost and not the girl. As her ill health and wasted cheek might well testify, the appearance of Mckenna continued to haunt her for months. The reader is aware that he was lost on Christmas Day, or rather on the night of it, and I remember seeing her in such early part of the following summer, during which time she was still the victim of a deceased imagination. Everything, in fact, that could be done for her was done. They brought her to a priest named Donnelly, who lived in Bolinegert, for the purpose of getting her cured, as he had the reputation of performing cures of that kind. They brought her also to the doctors, who also did what they could for her, but all in no purpose. Her fits were longer and of more frequent concurrence. Her appetite left her, and ere 4 months had elapsed, she herself looked like the spectre of the ghost himself could do for the life of him. It only now remains for me to mention the simple method of her cure, which was effected without either priest or doctor. It depended upon a word or two of advice given to her father by a very sensible man, who was in the habit of thinking on these matters somewhat and above the superstitious absurdities of some people. "If you wish your daughter to be cured," he said to the father, "leave the house you are now living in. Take her to some part of the country where she can have companions of her own class and states of life to mingle with. Bring her away from this place altogether, for you may rest assured that as long as there are objects before her eyes to remind her of what happened, she will not mend." The father, although he sat rent-free, took the excellent advice, even though the sacrifice of some comforts, for nothing short of the temptation of easy circumstances could have induced any man to reside in the wild and remote solitude. In the course of a few days he removed from it with his family, and came to reside amongst the cheerful aspect of enlivening intercourse of human life. The consequences were precisely as the man had told him. In the course of a few weeks the little girl began to find that the visits of the spectre were less like those of angels, few and far between. She was sent to school, and what with confidence derived from human society and superstition from new objects and images, she soon perfectly recovered. Ere long was thoroughly set free of the fearful creation of her own brain. The spot where the body of Mckenna was found is now marked with a little heap of stones, which has been collected since the melancholy event of his death. Every person who passes throws a stone to stack upon the heap. By his old custom of practice and of what it means, I do not know, unless it be simply to mark the spot of a visible means by preserving the memory of the occurrence. Daly's house, the scene of the supposed apparition, is now a shapeless ruin, which could scarcely be seen if it were not for the green spot which was once a garden, and now still shines in the distance like an emerald, but with no agreeable or pleasing associations. It is a spot which no solitary schoolboy will ever visit, nor indeed will any unflinching believer in the due particular nonsense of ghosts, with which to pass without compassion. It is under any circumstances a gloomy and barren place, but when looked upon in connection of what we have just recited, it is lonely, desolate, and awful. Okay, Cubs, that gets us to an hour. Okay, switching back to the bar. Anyway, well, that is an hour. That covered 3 stories. Puka, Bunsworth, and Frank Mckenna. Okay, yeah, that covers 3 more stories and 30 pages. So, that's all I'm going to go and do for tonight. So, if I'm live chatting, I may do it right then. I don't know. Wouldn't do me to get to do one now because I'm, not streaming. Ugh. Man. Anyway, yeah. Have a good one, Cubbies.
You know, it's kind of strange that I did that. I mean, I just did an entire stream that was previously recorded. Did anyone? I think I saw two people in the viewer listing, maybe. Yeah, just like two for the entire time. But hey, well, I don't know if anyone's still here, other than myself. But I'm thinking about doing a raid, and it's kind of funny that the person I was looking at gonna raid him probably raid Sly because I'm kind of watching her anyway. I mean, it only makes sense to watch the person I've been watching while streaming. Uh, you like her, Spy, Fox, pretty cute. I always refer to her as Commander in person, but Sly's cool. Uh, she doesn't normally stream at night. Right now, she's playing a game with Giraffe. And, well, it. I don't know if it was announced before or after I decided to do the stream today, but I went ahead and recorded this morning. So, uh, why the hell not? Let's just red Sly and see what happens. Again, Cubbies. I like doing these stories. Do like chatting. I mean, I hadn't really thought about doing the pop ups like I did during the record, but yeah, it's been a day. I do plan on doing my regular stream tomorrow. Uh, Good old fairy tales. I'm probably going to still do the stories from Grimm. So I have grabbed Book of Aesop's Fables that I can go ahead and start reading if and when I ever finish the Grimm books. Uh, I guess you guys are liking the Irish fairy tales. Let's see, that was. I ended page six, um, page 59 at the end of Fate of Frank Mckenna. I've only got um, a little over a third of the way through the book, can I say. The last page is 132. And the next story starts on 60. So, well, we're almost halfway through, really. But again, I hadn't really planned on doing the recorded one, but it kind of hit me today that I was having a bad morning and didn't really know if I wanted to stream tonight, but I had scheduled it, so I want to keep a schedule. I mean, let me do something right. Now I'm just kind of rambling, but I'm good at rambling. I ramble a lot. But anyway, yeah, we're gonna raid Sly. So, wait, no, it's / raid Striker Sly. I know it's only been like an hour, no, hour 14 of the stream, and it can't be right. The video itself was an hour, and I interrupted it. I was chatting before I even started it. Well, what the heck? We're gonna rinse fly anyway. I don't have any clever messages or anything else to post, but I'm not sure who would be here to post it. So, what the hell? Let's go Raider. Have a good night, Cubs.